Hello, everyone. I presume I'm facing an audience of kindred spirits, driven nuts by people's poor use of punctuation. I think I just asked Joan how this came about, and I think I asked her to talk about apostrophes. And then she broadened it wisely, and she'll talk about a lot of things tonight. I know some of you know Joan Baum. But for those of you who don't, Joan taught literature and writing at CUNY for many years as a tenured professor of English and calls herself a recovering academic. Her graduate school specialty was British literary history from 1770 to 1832. And her books include The Calculating Passion of Ada Byron, about Byron's mathematical daughter, who was reputed to have been the world's first computer programmer, working with Charles Babbage, and Mind Forged Manacles, a study of what the major English Romantic poets did to advance ending the slave trade and slavery in Britain in the early 19th century. On retirement, she was delighted to be able to drift into other time zones, popular and scholarly. She writes regularly for The Independent, contributing, doing book reviews, and is also the book reviewer for WSHU, the Connecticut-based NPR station. Please welcome Joan Baum.
And I do want to add what I mentioned before, that among the things I did at CUNY was start a grammar hotline, hoping that I would attract immigrant students who felt a little shy about asking questions, but it turned into an advertisement of competitive punctuation and grammar arguments on the part of professionals in Queens who would call up and put money on whether it was that or which and other like things. So the grammar hotline died. Anyway, Penny did write to me and announce something I never knew, that on the 24th of September, we're going to celebrate National Punctuation Day. Who knew? So she then said, could you please talk a bit about apostrophes? And I said, well, could we broaden it just a little bit? And then thinking that I wanted to broaden it more than a little bit, I gave her a kind of subtitle. And even though we're going to focus on punctuation, I kept the subtitle for the flyer, and the subtitle is Correct Solecisms, Win Nitpicking Friends, and Learn to Love the Apostrophe. And I do have apologies for that flyer. Not only did Alan in the front row point out that the balloon should be directed other than it is to the man, but I also put out a kind of teaser that there's an error here. But it's not an error in punctuation, so I beg forgiveness. The error, and that gets us at the second part of the subtitle, Nitpicking Friends, Nitpicking Talkers, the error is a split infinitive. And though that has long since hit the road along with other grammatical problems, I do observe it still, and the flyer read, I think most people are online just to obnoxiously draw attention to other people's spelling and grammar mistakes. And the to obnoxiously draw attention splits the infinitive of to draw attention. And I still keep to the old ways. If you ask me why, I honestly can't tell you, except I like the idea of keeping to some rules and standards. So, knowing that it was National Punctuation Day coming up, I did go online to find out who started it. And it was begun by Jeff and Norma Rubin, whom I do not know, in 2004. They were elementary school teachers, and they established a kind of punctuation playtime at their school along with all kinds of aids, and finally something like a mini Disney park. I wrote to them a number of times with correct punctuation, and I never heard back. So I assume that it's still going on somewhere in California for the kiddies, but there's nothing for the rest of us. I do, as I said, apologize for the flyer in throwing in a split infinitive instead of a punctuation error, but I kind of fell in love with the word solecisms and wanted to use it. A solecism is a Greek word, or it comes from the Greek, and it reflects the fact that the Greeks, the ancient Athenians, considered their own dialect the only proper dialect. But they had a colony solely in Cilicia. And the Greeks, the ancient Greeks, believed that the people of Cilicia bastardized the Greek tongue, and so solely became solecism, and the word is since used for errors. Errors in punctuation, but errors in grammar as well. The nitpicking part of the subtitle I already explained, and obviously I'm a nitpicker of some extent, holding to the split infinitive. And the apostrophe. Well, Penny was right in holding to my speaking about the apostrophe because of all the grammatical mistakes in my many years teaching. It seems to me that the main one is the confusion of ITS with ITS. It goes everywhere. The second I see in my own grandchildren's emails, "You're right, Grandma," or usually "You're wrong, Grandma," where it's YOUR, no apostrophe. So I do stay with the original thought of talking about the apostrophe in that regard, that those two are prominent errors. But I wonder how many people who don't know this library, Roger's Memorial, did they think that there was a Roger and there should be a possessive there? No. And it's located on Cooper's Farm Road. No apostrophe there as well. And so another common error is to confuse possessives with titles. Schools chancellor, chancellor of the schools, no apostrophe.
But in the case of Cooper's Farm, I beg to differ
Yes.
here. Because Cooper was a name, Cooper.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yes.
if it's Cooper's Farm, it really should have an apostrophe.
Well, if you're talking about Cooper's Farm,
And
but
I
as a
think-
title, it's Cooper's Farm Road, and it has none.
I know it has none, but I think that was a mistake not to give it
Oh,
an
okay.
apostrophe.
I'll buy that mistake, but it's in stone now, and
I realize
all
that.
your stationery, and
I
that's
know.
it, money talks.
I know.
Thanks. Broadening it out to punctuation. The word means pointing, inserting marks, and there are so many. Commas, semicolons, colons, N's and M dashes, parentheses, brackets, apostrophes, exclamation points, ellipses, dot, 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 periods, quotation marks, insider quotation marks, and I do not accept this. And also multiple uses of all of those marks. Just yesterday I was leaving a doctor's office, and on his door it said, "Don't forget to schedule your annual exam for next year." Exclamation point. And I began to think, and I'm just going to open that up for your consideration. What if there were no exclamation point? You weren't being commanded, but just a period. More than that, had this note, I am sure, appeared online, and this is what I see, it would have said, "Don't forget to schedule your annual exam for next year, exclamation point, exclamation point, exclamation point." online you see a lot of these multiple uses of certain marks. Of all the punctuation marks, however, the ones that cause a lot of grief to nitpickers and ilk are commas. Some of you may know of and have read a book called Eats, Shoots, and Leaves. And for those of you who don't, a pause. Eats, comma, shoots, and leaves. All verbs. No comma. Eats, shoots, a noun, and leaves. So that is one example of what commas can do and confuse. Though I'm particularly fond of another example that comes from a book, and by the way, Penny, you get 2 contributions. A World Without Whom and Shady Characters, both out. And in this book, written by a woman I don't know, but she's obviously young and tech savvy and full of all the jargon and cant that belongs to the technological world, she had another example that is even better than eats, shoots, and leaves. I'm hard at work. I'm hard, comma, at work. Only for certain genders. So, okay. Obviously, there are rules for punctuation, and we're never going to be able to get any consensus about how much these rules should apply. I mean, I'm trying to be casual and saying I'm a nitpicker, but I'm already defensive, in effect, saying I like to go by the rules. And if you want to know if there are rules, where you may find them, now we go into another ambiguous territory. There are guidebooks. There are style manuals. And if you're really taken with this aspect of the subject, I will leave my copy of just a few of these, other than to note that there are style guides for general writing, there are style guides for legal documents, there are style guides for academic papers and scholarship, there are style guides for journalism, and every single discipline, if not medium, will have its own set of rules. So many, how do you know which one to choose? Well, look, there are 4 main ones. I know this is thrilling. The AP, which is the Associated Press Style Guide that most journalists use. The APA, which stands for American Psychological Association, and that's for the social sciences. That's pretty pervasive. There's also the MLA, Modern Language Association, which has style guides for people not just in the academic profession, but anybody working in the humanities. And if you're doing cross-disciplinary or interdisciplinary work, good luck. But the bottom line for me is, if you are writing for an organization or a paper, find out what their preferences are. And there are differences. In fact, I looked up the differences and counted, you may have more, mainly 5. There is, first of all, the difference about what's called the Oxford comma, otherwise known as the Harvard comma. A, comma, B, comma, and C. If you don't subscribe to that, and you're a journalist and probably won't, you would say A, comma, B, and C. If the A, B, and C are very chunky phrases or clauses, I will even use the semicolon. The idea is to make writing clear, to communicate as effectively as possible. But the different guides do differ on the Oxford comma. The Associated Press, the journalist one, says, leave it out, A, comma, B, C. All the other guides say, leave it in. 2, the use of the definite article, that's part of the title. At my choral society where I sing, there is a reception. There was a reception last concert at the Baum. And it was announced in our booklet, reception at the, lowercase, the Baum, P-A-L-M, capital P. I changed it because I was in charge of the bulletin. And I changed it to the, capital T, Baum, having just gone by on 27 and seeing a huge sign which said the, capital letter, Baum. A certain publisher of a certain newspaper of record out here, also sings in the choral society, shall remain nameless, was furious at me and sent me a long screed saying, no, I never allow that at my paper. And I said, well, I'm the editor in charge of the bulletin, so that becomes a different kind of standoff. She sent more emails than I did, and I was getting a headache. So finally I yielded and said, fine, enjoy the poem. The use of numbers, strictly not a punctuation concern, but related. The Associated Press and the APA spell out all numbers below 10, and then the numerals for those after. The Chicago Manual of Style, which is the granddaddy of all style manuals, so thick, so full, so substantive, you can get a hernia from walking around with it. There's no paperback as far as I know. Spells out all the numbers, up to 99. Always spell a number, of course, if the number begins a sentence. 200 years have passed since I have been reading about the comma. 4th difference among punctuation guides. Books and articles. Do you put them in italics? Do you underline them? There are differences among the manuals here too. The Associated Press, the journalism, never italicize or underline a book, poem, or newspaper. I do. I just like the way it looks. And I send it to NPR. Because I'm broadcasting, they don't care anyway, but I just send the script on that way. I just like the looks of it. But there are differences. And again, if I knew that someone there cared deeply and had a style manual telling me, I would observe that. The Chicago Manual of Style uses quotation marks around articles and chapters, and they do italicize books. So they are at variance with the journalism. And as I said, certain newspapers have their own preferences. The 5th has to do, surprisingly, with state abbreviations. The Associated Press likes Alabama, A-L-A, Cal, C-A-L. The APA doesn't care. And the Chicago Manual of Style and the Humanities Manual like Florida as FL, Maryland as MD, California as CA. No periods. What's the big deal? At some point, we're going to have to confront this. Every now and then, and of course you know I found one example, there is a big deal, and it had to do with money. Now I hope you can see this. I just printed this out. I'll read what it says and try to show you. I know that not everybody can see this. I'll go like this.
When you move it, it makes it much easier to read.
Okay. Half here and half there. Okay. This is from a court document regarding the canning, processing, preserving, freezing, drying, marketing, storing, packing for shipment or distribution of agricultural produce, including meat and fish products, perishable foods. Very sexy. Here's the problem. A judge had to rule on whether this said that workers were going to be responsible for one or two items mentioned here, specifically packing for shipment or distribution of agricultural produce. If shipment and distribution were two separate activities, the guys would get overtime. But if there were commas and the judge thought maybe there should have been, maybe that was the intention, then the activities would be reduced to one, and the workers, who obviously brought this suit, would not get overtime. The judge decided that the ambiguity was serious enough so that he ruled in the workers' favor, and they got the overtime. And I'm sure that the company was going crazy. Watch the comments from now on, make sure. And probably more than just commas, maybe exclamation points, or maybe parens saying, this is one activity, or a choice, not two. So there is an example, probably one of the rare ones, where punctuation can mean money. And now to what I would like to engage you in discussion of, the heart of what I'd like to have for this talk, and that is the way in which the internet has changed punctuation, not to mention how the schools are following. In this book, A World Without Whom, The Essential Guide to Language in the BuzzFeed Age. The young author, Emily Favilla, who is now global copy chief at BuzzFeed, writes, in effect, forget the rules, everything is open. And in fact, the title has whom crossed out. BuzzFeed was, once upon a time, an internet-based media and entertainment news tracking industry, and it was founded in 2006. Now it's gone into serious journalism. It's won prizes, particularly for political coverage. And they do lists and videos. You can look them up anyway. But you'll see the support for her statement that this is gone. Many of the rules about punctuation have gone, and the internet has done it. It's not just Donald Trump and the ellipsis. He probably doesn't know it's an ellipsis. But young people don't use punctuation the way older folks do and don't want to. She has 2 chapters in her book. They include these: how social media has changed the game and how the internet has changed punctuation forever. I went through her book and counted among the various examples she gives 7 examples of the way in which the internet has changed punctuation, and you can probably think of more. First, comma splices. A comma splice is a fancy way of saying a run-on sentence. I'm not wild about using smiley faces. I think they stand in the way of specific expression. Those are 2 sentences. But if I wrote them out with a comma splice, I would have it this way: I'm not wild about using smiley faces, comma, I think they stand in the way of specific expression. The rules say that that comma should not be there. The rules say it should have a period, at the least a semicolon. One way in which the internet has changed punctuation is I see many comma splices, and not just in the 2 sentences I gave, which are run together, but more. And sometimes no comma at all, just the run-on without any punctuation at all. Another way in which the internet has changed punctuation, I used to see even a word like online. Once upon a time, there were 2 words, and then a hyphen, and now 1. And again, the compression, or certainly up to the point where a hyphen would replace 2 words. Right swipe your card. Right dash swipe. No use of capitals on many words. In fact, the word internet, I remember when it first started to come out in print, had a capital letter. I still automatically, for some reason, thinking of it as specific and definite, capitalize the I. It's not capitalized anymore, and a great many nouns, proper nouns, specific nouns with origins do not use capitals. Punctuation marks themselves are now used online for irony. They're used, I guess, in place of what I just did before, which is someone saying, you know the special way in which I mean this. Well, use words to tell the special way. Online, people don't, and instead use the punctuation, as I said, for irony, sarcasm, special insider meaning. You can write a sentence, and if you put 4 exclamation points after it, you're yelling. If you put 4 question marks after something where ordinarily you would just have 1, you're calling someone pretty much an idiot. I mean, it's a way of getting another layer of meaning and intention in without using words. But it can be very confusing. Sometimes, and I've looked at emails with a lot of exclamation points, and I'm not sure what the line is between yelling and outrage, or maybe humor. Who's in charge here? It's a question, right? But what happens to it instead of the question mark if there's the exclamation point? The criticism is built in. Now, why is that such a big deal? Well, nothing is a big deal. But it is in the sense of style, because it obviates the writer from saying why. All of these uses and misuses take the place of explanation. Then there are the matters of periods. No one seems to use them anymore in emails anyway. And if you use them according to this young woman, you're a bully. You're being very formal, you're being stodgy, no one's going to pay attention to your email. The biggest use of punctuation affected by the internet to me, and I am wonderfully guilty because I love to use them, are dashes. When I'm doing something formal, I will have a colon. But I love the dash. I love the breeziness of it. And I like the sense that the message and the medium meet beautifully in the dash. In fact, I've noted in my own writing now that I'm going dash crazy. So just to keep me back in tune, I'm using the colon every now and then. And in other words, what we're going for here is that the internet has been changed, the punctuation has been changed by the internet in regard to no punctuation at all. The last one is really not typically a punctuation problem, but it's related. The use of emojis, formerly known as emoticons, the smiley faces, and not just the faces. I mean, you get a whole list, hundreds of let me express myself this way with just one click. I was surprised to learn, where do these come from? And they move so fast and become so pervasive so quickly. The word comes from Japanese, and it translates in Japanese as image character. I never knew that. And it was invented in 1990. Boy, did it move fast, thanks to a certain Shigetaka Kurita. This lady says that the emojis are the most evolved form of punctuation now available online. She says they don't take away from the written language. They add, move, they make it succinct. I do not concur, but I understand that I am now particularly in my age group a minority about that. I can't believe I did that. Okay, let me just repeat that. I can't believe I did that. You can get an emoji to follow that sentence that can be said. I can't believe I did that. Arrogantly happy. I can't believe I did that. Total confusion. Idiotic. And I saw one. I can't believe I did that. Tears. You can use these emojis in, obviously, a diverse and various number of ways. But which way? That's your burden. It's not the writer's. And I guess that's my subtext here, that I feel on behalf of the written language and clear communication, a releasing of the burden and the obligation of the writer. That's your problem. And certainly we're in an age where everybody is very quickly defensive. Oh, misunderstood. That's not what I meant at all. A wonderful line of evidence. In conclusion, and then I will open it up for questions and discussion. You may make statements, no emojis. In conclusion, I wrote to my tech guy, he's 40, and I said, what do you think about punctuation being affected by the internet? And he said, and I quote, I was surprised, search engines like Google and writing in general have worsened my spelling and punctuation skills. And his point was it embraced spelling as well. And he's right. If you Google a word and you misspelled it, Google would say, did you mean, and spell it for you. And you're so happy to get there that you forget the misspelling. And the misspelling and the right spelling blend, and you don't know. There'll never be a correction. There'll never be an education. And so he says no one keeps track, and the same thing for punctuation. He says also that errors in punctuation move very rapidly on social media. And so you're up against the numbers. You're never going to win. Publishers, by the way, are indifferent to errors in spelling and punctuation. I'm a reviewer. And my favorite example of this was getting a book from Simon & Schuster, no small outfit, and then writing them a note saying, I know when this is in its new edition that you're going to care about a really gross punctuation error on page comma, not to mention the misspelling of the title of the book in the text. Did I ever get an answer? Of course not.
No.
For people to go into a computer program, for a book and correct it, forget it, no time. Finally, my young tech assistant also said, because errors move so quickly on the social media, they invite new abbreviations, new words that spread very quickly, so that interferes with communication. There was a time, I confess, I didn't know what LOL stood for. Out loud. Oh. And I'd like to, humor is among the quirkiest and most personal of manifestations. And the LOL really is illustrative of taking the place of clear writing. He mentioned the one that's on the move right now, BRB. Be right back for another tweet. And his favorite, and I guess mine, I never heard of it, but he says, this is there and it's on the move. Ralphal Mayo, ROFLMAO, rolling on floor, laughing my ass off. And then there was ... And by the way, he said, that's really not the way it started. It's really Ralphla Mafio, rolling on floor, laughing my F ass off. So if you really want to be hip, that's it. All this, and his final line to me, I was really surprised, was wonderful, and I'll close with this. All this jargon with bad spelling and little punctuation makes for more dumb people. Thank you. And now, comments, and particularly if you get around to it, what the schools should do. Yes, I'm sorry to point. The teacher, you are.
My name is Deanna O'Brien, and I'd like to know, question, you were a college professor, and I well remember the first writing class that I had to take, and how I suffered for it. What happens now in the universities? Are these things being implemented and used, or do the professors teach, let me call it the old-fashioned way?
At CUNY, when I was last there, writing classes were electives. People who came into college, the freshmen, if their exams, if they took placement exams, showed that they had trouble at the level of the sentence, they were placed into a composition class. Composition is not writing. And those became very difficult courses to teach. And when you got out of that requirement, if you didn't want to take any course in writing, you didn't have to. When I was at CUNY, I started elective programs, by the way, hoping to counter that trend. And I particularly started courses writing for majors in the sciences. I thought that was imperative. And majors in social sciences, the most needy. But what's going on in the high schools, and particularly in big cities, is you have no more English classes. There are English language arts. So there are disciplines that are mushed together, and visuals and online take the place of reading. I'm delighted when I come across a statistic that says kids are reading books, particularly young adults and particularly boys, a hard audience to get. It delights me. But the fact is that nationwide, what did I come across the other day? Only a third of young people read for pleasure. They read only what they have in the schools. I'm sorry, Lynn.
Yeah, well, first of all, I promise you that I will cut back on those exclamation marks. When I email you, it's
Or capital letters.
Yeah. So my mother was very involved in grammar and punctuation, and I take these tests on the internet that you can find that are very interesting, that test your punctuation skills. I love to do that. But I believe that if I took my 3 nephews, college graduates, good colleges, and I gave them one of those tests, do this punctuation, that they couldn't do it, because I don't think they've been taught punctuation. I don't. And I think what happens on the internet is a generational thing, that it doesn't occur to them that they're doing anything that's not grammatically correct.
You're right.
And
You've mentioned something that's true. They don't know. And then your comment about what are the schools doing. I'll tell you, as an English teacher, I always felt that I had the hardest time because I was in the world where multiple choice did not exist. I had to sit and read essays, and more, even English has become a multiple choice, or pick out the series to show that you understand cognitive development. What's the logic of, a few sentences? So I don't know how to answer that. Also, doesn't anyone want to say, and what about handwriting?
Yeah,
Right.
done.
It's more complicated than that. The writing comes from stream of consciousness speaking. So you just, and the machine will take it over pretty quickly. We can just dictate whatever we want to write. And the reason it's so sloppy is because of autocorrect and spell check that are theoretically built in. This morning on TV, who was the leader of North Korea?
Kim Jong-un, right?
So it said on the crawl at the bottom of the screen, South Korea leader Kim Jong-un. It was right there in front of us. But the question for you is, when you do a series of words using dashes to separate them, do you put a dash before and?
Yes.
Come on, folks.
Yes, I do. Because I'm using the dashes just to set off a stream of consciousness. I want to rush with all the clauses.
Comparison to using
Right. Right.
Sorry.
No, but you're right that this is why the internet, together with particularly the reliance on oral discourse, combined, it's a kind of murderous pact, and people are not writing. I'm sorry, yes.
Thank you very much. I really enjoyed your talk.
Go home and write and punctuate.
I am a journalist from years ago, and I'm a 30-year computer teacher, retired, and now I teach iPhone and iPad classes, mostly to seniors. And I have tried to explain to my students who are seniors that there's a difference between writing something formally on the internet,
Formally, they used to be.
and speaking. And what we do with text messaging and emojis is more dialogue. And so, in my opinion, that can be freer and quicker.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just a way to speak as if you were talking on the telephone. And because we're doing it with text, but in a quick way, that's why we need the emojis, because you don't have the face-to-face contact in your quick interaction with people. And so an emoji is really, really important, I think. I also think that we need to still encourage formal writing, but that's not the same as texting, which I think we can have a different attitude about it if you think of that as talking to somebody on the telephone. And that's the way you are most going to get in touch and stay in touch with your grandchildren and your nieces and nephews because they're not even going to answer an email anymore.
You are absolutely right. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I got that admonition from a grandchild the other day. Grandma, it's embarrassing, he said, to look at his iPhone and see an email coming in. And he was telling me in advance, you do this again, I won't answer. My friends will know.
And if you think back to journalism compared to a novel or a paper of academia, words were money. And in journalism, you tried to have the least amount of words possible to make your statement, although you wanted to do it in proper grammar. Nowadays, with texting especially, you want them to read it. That's the most important thing, is to get your message across. And nowadays, everybody, especially younger generation, are so busy. When I send out a text message this long, I don't get an answer. But I reword it and just get this much, they answer immediately.
I thought you were also going to say, and probably you were, that the text and the message online have their own rationale. Instead of "Dear Sir," forget it. If I want to get a book free from a publisher, I'm not going to say "Dear Sir" or "Madam," even if I, in the old days, would make sure I would get their name, because that would, attract. But people pick up other people's mail. I don't, on the other hand, say, "Yo, send me that."
I mean, if you send an email, would you not put a salutation? In an email, would you eliminate the salutation?
I do.
You do?
I have to confess, I don't say "Dear," and my gosh, in the old days too, right?
I always put a salutation.
It's not a letter. In fact, total strangers, particularly in publicity departments, I'll begin an email with "Hi." And they certainly write to me, "Hello, Joan."
So what is your punctuation? Because I'm a little bit confused about that. I do hi, comma, Debbie, period. Because it's not the same as dear Debbie, comma, or dear Debbie.
For sure, online I'm pretty loose, but not to the extent of the looseness I itemized. I will never run on clauses and commit a comma splice, because I think it's confusing. I also like rules, because I like forms. I like the idea that if I'm going to break a rule, at least I'll know what I'm breaking.
And be consistent.
Pardon me?
Be consistent.
Oh, absolutely be consistent. In fact, the email that begins "Hi" to a total stranger, I will sign Joan, not Professor or Emerita. I'd never get an answer there.
So do you put a period after the name, hi? How do you do that?
Hi, usually I just say "Hi." You know why? Because I have someone's name already in the email address.
Yours truly.
Yeah, yours truly. That is so terrible, yours truly. If I'm yours, I truly hope I am. It's redundant. Well, that's really going far back. Sincerely yours. With, I don't know why this just came into my head, but why not? Stream of consciousness. I have never, nor will I ever, write a condolence letter online. Nor will I even get a carrot. I want to take a piece of white paper and, in what's left of my handwriting, write something. I don't want to have Hallmark do it for me. Could you see some of my condolence letter with the emojis, tears, sincerely?
I still send out birthday cards that people find so special, because nobody said, everyone's like, just text me some crazy things. It's not the same as getting something in the mail that's sitting there for a few days before your birthday.
Right.
So come take my class, which is called Colorful Greetings, Bring Back Real Mail.
Penny and then Lynn.
Okay, well, just a couple of comments. One, in the capitalization of the article.
Mhm.
I mean, I would absolutely capitalize that, particularly if that institution uses a capital T in their own title, in their title. So
I'm gonna go to the Palm.
I think you're right. I mean,
Or
but
the New York Times, you very
I
often
was
not,
gonna say.
don't see the the.
really, right.
Yeah,
Well, anyway.
yeah.
One of the, I mean, changing mores online, it doesn't bother me as much as outright examples of complete ignorance. Like the apostrophe, I think is the most ill-used.
How wonderful she
Punctuation.
completes the circle.
Okay. I mean, in terms of, you know, the president's men or, you know, something, not knowing to put an apostrophe after the S to make it possessive. But all the time, every single day, you see examples of, you know, shirts for sale, like a sign outside on a store, and the shirt will have an apostrophe after it. I mean, these are the things that are everywhere, and they're, you know, obviously they're
They
wrong,
all-
but they're, now even the word Hamptons, I see an apostrophe after Hampton before the S, which, so I think
More than one.
that's one of the things that really bothers me.
By the way, in the old Brooklyn Board of Education, there was a little coffee shop, and I would go into it, and I created a scene one day when I said, look, you have a sign, fresh bake bread. And I lost it on the bake. Freshly baked, I lost both.
No.
Also, one other anecdote, and then Lynn, on the subway, you see a lot of punctuation errors in ads.
Yes.
And now that subway cars have all the same ad, a podiatrist was advertising some years ago, and I counted 5 major errors. So I took down his name, number, called up, and they hung up on me. Lynn?
2 quick comments. Me and John went fishing.
Oh, yeah.
That sentence, me and John went
Yeah.
fishing, how many times do people start with
You
sentences?
see, these guests.
No, but here's where you see it all, but John and me went
Or
fishing.
myself.
Oh, it's even this.
Or myself, right,
Myself.
right.
So then the
Right.
other thing is, Son of Sam, Jimmy Breslin, those letters that Son of Sam would send, you know, and Jimmy Breslin said, I remember this, he said, he's smart and he's educated, he has used a semicolon correctly.
But remember the Unabomber?
Yeah.
His brother said, I recognize the very well-educated mathematician here
Right.
in this.
But
Sorry.
you know, even it drives me crazy because the newscasters use April
Oh.
Brown constantly. It's like, oh, shouldn't they just like know that as part of their job? Or why does it
course.
happen all the time?
Because the people in charge don't know either. And there's also a diminution in what people do in delivering so-called news. It's become entertainment.
Right.
And so it takes on
It's not-
the sense of, you know, the looseness which permits, except for the fact that they don't know that it's an error.
Irregardless, becoming.
Irregardless,
It's becoming a
right?
word, it's in the dictionary, you
Right,
know,
right.
it's crazy.
Yes.
One comment, you mentioned something about uniformity and abbreviation of states. You know, there's Florida FL, there's Alabama ALA.
Right, different style books.
But the post office, the U.S. Postal Service, has developed a specific abbreviation for states for the purpose of, I guess maybe it's character scanning, and therefore to use ALA could misdirect the mail unless they just use the zip code properly,
You're
which
ever-
overcomes the ALA.
Good point, but I'm talking about, again, in discourse, printed discourse, not on envelopes. Yes,
Why would you even use an abbreviation for a state in the context of a document or a paragraph?
I have no idea. I have no idea. And by the way, as a journalist, and I've been told this by people with prestigious journals, if if I mention California, never ever abbreviate. First reference will always be, I'll spell it out.
They even did away without comma between like Mass, if you go to comma, New York.
Oh,
Like now it's like, it's, yeah, that's on the standard mail thing.
Right,
Yeah.
absolutely. Okay, yeah, right, but that's a very controlled condition. Well, may you all go off and
There's so much more.
use, there's so much more, but make yourself a promise somehow. Use the semicolon. I hate to see it go away.